Good evening and welcome to another ViveEcosse podcast. I am one of your hosts, Graham Spence, and tonight I'm joined by Alison Graham.
Hi Graham, how are you tonight?
I'm very, very good. Now Alison, you join us back on the podcast. You've been on another field trip. I caught you on STV singing some songs on TV again. Can you tell us a little bit about where you've been and what you've been up to?
Yeah, well, the funny part of that is every time I'm on TV I seem to be singing, and I've got the most dreadful singing voice. So somebody sent me a clip of me singing yesterday. So, in all seriousness, yesterday was at the Scottish Parliament. There was a protest outside, that's the reason the Parliament was designed like that, to allow people to come and have their voices heard. So the reason yesterday was because of the gender recognition reform bill that was going through stage 3 and eventually went to the votes today. So it was pretty extraordinary over the period of 3 very, very long, well, certainly 2 very long days and nights to go through. I think in the end there was 170 amendments or something. There was a huge amount. They were all kind of grouped together, which was taking a huge amount of time to go through. And there was some particularly that have, hit the social media pages and the media and the kind of mainstream media as well. So I went through for that, intending just to be there for the kind of afternoon. I actually got tickets to go into the chamber. So we went in the 4 to 6 session, which actually went on till after 1 in the morning. I had to leave to get a train, otherwise I'd be sleeping on somebody's couch last night. So I stayed as long as I could, and it was very interesting to watch just the dynamics of what happened, and watch how different parties were kind of playing it. So there was a point last night I thought Labour were potentially going to pull something out to embarrass the Scottish Government. And then when I heard the amendments that passed later, that was clearly a deal that was being done by the SNP and Labour to let some of those amendments pass. Because had they not passed, I think it would have been very embarrassing for Labour to vote. Not that I don't think it was embarrassing anyway, but I think it would have been more so because they'd kind of stuck their neck out a lot on some of the amendments, particularly Jackie Bailey's amendments. So it was an interesting. Evening. It was an interesting evening. Certainly, through the GRR, which is quite a hotly contested bill. I think it is now the most contested bill in the Scottish Parliament history, as in amendments and process and challenge and such. Yeah. It's by no means done. We've noticed that the Scottish Parliament, physically the lights turned out while the MSPs were sitting there one night. We had a blackout while we were there. Which is really because the Parliament was never envisaged to actually sit past midnight. It was always meant as a family Parliament, meaning that people should have been home and away and shouldn't be there at that time of night. There was we can come on to the substantive point of the reaction to the bill in a minute, but certainly it was my impression that the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon herself came out really, really poorly from this, because she effectively was the driver of there will be no delay, this is going through now, this is an emergency piece of legislation, it needs rattled through Parliament. Yes.
What's your view there?
I think absolutely that was one of the kind of key takeaways for me, that it showed an irrationality. I think that it was going through at all costs. Now, bear in mind, and I know we'll come on to talk about this, we are in the maelstrom of going into a cost of living winter with NHS strikes. We've had, the nurses turn down the pay deal. People are genuinely struggling. I mean, even in the space that we have here locally, the community space, everybody's thinking, how do we get people through winter? And it seemed incredibly self-indulgent, almost like it was her personal fiefdom rather than a Parliament of Scotland. And I think that will not play well long term when people digest that. What I realised today on social media, you've got 2 types of people who've been entirely immersed in this, and people who are just vaguely aware. of what's going on and haven't read the detail. And I think once I think the mainstream media, I think Nicola Sturgeon is in a lot of trouble personally, because I think she owns this, and the MSPs who voted for it very much own this. They can't have say on one hand they've got 6 years of debate on this and then claim ignorance to the outcomes. I mean, there was a huge amount of opportunity in that time to really scrutinise this. And I know some of the suggestions. One of the speakers yesterday was Joanna Cherry, MP KC, who's also a sexual crime prosecutor before a politician, and she very much made the point of, we have the mechanism for a citizens' assembly in Scotland. You know, Ireland have used such a mechanism to tackle contentious issues and get societal adherence, societal views, a very balanced and a very respectful, respectfully controlled environment that allows a very good balance on either side. It allowed people to change their minds. And I think the entrenchment of this debate has been a real poor reflection on the state of Scottish politics, to be honest. We really do need to not follow the Michael Gove model of we're fed up of experts. We need people to get good decisions and good scrutiny. We need experts. We need experts to be balanced. We need to be able to properly question people on both sides of every debate from all angles of the debate, particularly something that's going to affect so many people. And I think it's been very disingenuous the way this has been played. On the one hand, as a minor administrative change, and yet, as you say, it's the most contested bill so far in the Scottish Parliament. I mean, the fact, if you've got over 100 amendments to a bill, you've got to question, has your bill actually been through any level of scrutiny to get to that stage? I think there's politics been played with it, absolutely. A lot of showboating, and I think, honestly, it's not been an honest debate. There's been people tried to be shut down for raising genuine concerns, particularly people like Michelle Thompson with a very, lived experience, that led to her amendment, which was
very personal input. She gave a
absolutely
personal story,
and to have so I mean, her point was that she has. She's been through a hugely traumatic experience, but she has agency. She has a voice. She was there not to represent herself, but to represent the people in the same situation as her that don't have that voice, don't have that agency. And surely to God, that's the point in the Scottish Parliament. That's what we all thought the Scottish Parliament was here for. And I think that's been very stark for those of us who are very invested in Scotland having our own Parliament and an independence Parliament. We foresee and hope to enable. And I think this has been I think somebody pointed out yesterday it was the longest day, it was the shortest day yesterday. So from today, the days start to lengthen, the skies will start to brighten. And I think that needs to happen for Scottish democracy. I mean, moving context aside, the way this bill was handled was incredibly unprofessional. And to say 6 years, like elapsed time, is a definition of a robust bill is nonsense, to be honest. We
also had input from the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, and she was quite, she had quite a strong contribution, and it was almost dismissed by the First Minister. It was almost dismissed by the party of government. It was strange, because I know you're obviously talking about Joanna Cherry when you say an MP and a sexual offences prosecutor. However, Joanna Cherry is also the chair of the Special Committee on Human Rights in the UK. So, I mean, again, Joanna Cherry and, the UN Special Rapporteur, these are considerable contributions, and it makes me wonder, are we not, we already know, and it was Roddy Dunlop, Casey, I think, that pointed it out, that the hate crime legislation actually hasn't been enacted yet, which was another piece of contentious legislation that was put through. And I think the fear might be from the Scottish Government, we're now stacking bills that could take effect but haven't taken effect, and it's almost like we're not letting them take effect because they're still contentious, so we're awaiting the contentiousness leaving. And the problem we've got is there's two huge pieces of legislation that were contentious in their own right. One of them was, I can't remember the actual bill, but it was getting it right for every child. Do you remember the piece of legislation that appointed effectively a state-sponsored nanny?
The named person bill?
Yeah, that was it. The named person bill, and that was Gerfec, and it got pulled back because people, legally it was an intrusion on your. I think it was ruled an intrusion on your personal family life, and that was the Equality Act that kind of took centre stage there. We also had the Offensive Behaviours at Football Act, which was the Threatening Communications Bill. And it kind of focused on, at the time, it was considered, they're trying to deal with sectarianism at football, especially between Rangers and Celtic, when, to be totally fair to the people who are there, the people who are watching Rangers and Celtic are certainly not bothered by the songs and chants they chant at each other. So again, it was the government got involved in something and done it in such a contentious way that then spilled over into your human rights and your equality, and it makes me think that this legislation, again, we've already seen the UK government, Alistair Jack's already said that they will look to get in the road, they'll put up whatever wall they can and they'll defend it, because effectively this isn't just Scotland. By enabling the GRR, it effectively tries to bind the UK government, especially the Passport Agency and the Registrar of Births and things, into the same, because we're not dealing with just people who are born. I mean, it'd be much simpler if Scotland was an independent country and everybody who was born in Scotland was who we're dealing with, but we're not. You can technically go through this as long as you are in Scotland. You could be a day visitor, and you could be, as long as you stay for the minimum period, you effectively could, enact under this legislation, which I think is a huge problem as well.
It is. It's one of the things that actually came across most to me last night. A lot of the amendments were going in, and there was some quite powerful contributions by some of the Labour MSPs as well, and from the Tory benches, which is something I didn't think I would be saying very much. But all seriousness, but it is a Scottish Parliament. We're a Scotland of many different voices, and that is really important. So, kind of all joking apart, their contributions really were about where's the clarity in this bill, and that is something that I've been reflecting in my experience in politics, and the really poor decision making and the lack of accountability, and to put it bluntly, the laziness of legislators to devolve their responsibility to lobbyists and other groups. And I think people have got into a habit that they've actually, I think if you pulled some of the public servants of the past, like your Tony Benns and stuff, they would be utterly horrified at what passes as a politician these days. I mean, genuinely, you've worked in Westminster. I know there's other friends who've worked, in Westminster or worked in Holyrood, and we need to up our game, really, because what they've done with this is they've not considered the outcomes. Good decision making is all about the outcomes. What are the potential outcomes, both positive and negative? How do you support and promote the positives, and how do you mitigate the risk of the negatives? And it has been so blatant that it's going to be somebody else's problem. And I think, to come back to the offensive behaviour of football, again, all these things as a soundbite policy sound very valid, very laudable, but when you actually get into the detail of how is this implemented? How does this reflect on, football fans compared to rugby fans, and how does, this, affect other things? What it's actually ended up doing by being so badly done is it's been pulled back and it's emboldened people. And this is the problem. One of the things that, particularly you were saying about the hate crime bill, which Roger Dunlop, Casey had mentioned, now a lot of people think that's law. And this is another really disingenuous thing about politics at the moment, and the people in the communication. People really don't know what way's up. And again, the clarity that was asked last night about this legislation, I think it was Jeremy Balfour had raised a thing about a constituent who was a staff nurse or something, who was asking, for guidance of, from the cabinet minister, Shona Robinson, of, if you've got a female patient, which this staff nurse did have, who'd explicitly asked for whatever reason, I mean, it's utterly her entitlement to ask for female-only nurses for her personal intimate care, which, I mean, you would think that's completely reasonable. and expected. You would think that's something that would even be, have to ask for. But because this nurse knew that they had a member of staff that would not, be able to fulfil that, let's just say, they genuinely didn't know. Would they lose their jobs? Would they be in trouble with their employer, with the NHS? What was the guidance for public bodies? I mean, if public bodies and the public don't know, how can Shona Robinson just say, it won't impact the Equality Act? That's very, very high level. People want to, after 6 years, you think maybe a bit of detail here. Now, if I'm doing a process, you're looking at it in detail. You go down all the routes to what if this happens? Have we thought about that? How have we mitigated this? Here's our response. If you were designing this as a system, it would be the embedded business logic. So there needs to be policy logic embedded so that, we saw it through COVID at a community level running a village hall, which was not a regulated environment. Now, the COVID guidance, and I do kind of have to say, obviously, this was, something that was a global pandemic. It wasn't expected. But still, you still should have proactive plans for emergency situations. There was real afterthought for anybody that visited us. We had to kind of make it up. What we did was we created a village halls network, and we actually got the council involved, and we looked at risk assessment ideas, and we brought people in, professionals, and we were doing all this ourselves because the government actually weren't providing us guidance. And you could say, well, okay, maybe a little bit mitigating because of the circumstance, but that seems to be the general way of things now. Is that we come up with this, we say it, proclaim it from the mound, and you just need to all work it out. And if you get it wrong, nothing to do with us. I'm not accepting that this time. This is on the MSPs. They've had the time. Ignorance is no excuse.
Well, on that, you're right. It has been 6 years. It's existed over two parliamentary sessions, parliament sessions. So two actual parliaments. A session only been 1 year. It's existed now over two full parliaments, and it's interesting because I'm going to share a story here. I was not something I speak to now, it must be said, but I was the campaign manager for Shirley Ann Somerville, and she got in 2016, and we got in. The SNP was on a huge wave of support. I'm not in the SNP anymore. It's not particularly going to cause me any trouble, this, but Shirley Ann was appointed a minister in the Scottish Government. Which was no surprise. Shirley Ann worked as the Deputy Chief Exec of the SNP. She was definitely one of Nicola Sturgeon's inner circle. She was definitely in the tent. There was no denying that. Shirley Ann ended up with a portfolio for effectively what would then become the GRR. She effectively got the portfolio for that. And I remember it wasn't long after she was in, and I visited. I didn't work for Shirley Ann as an employee or anything, but I went into her office and we were having a general chat, and there was a few of us there, and I remember saying, "Oh, you've been landed with quite a, this is quite a hot topic. This is quite a controversial thing. There's a lot to balance here. There's, people want more rights. People are against losing their own rights. There's a huge amount here that you're going to have to unpack and kind of navigate through." And she wasn't anti-trans or anything, but Shirley Ann was like, I cannot believe I've been landed with this. Like, this is not what I wanted to be dealing with. And I was like, just park it off. And she was like, at the time it seemed like such a small throwaway comment, but she went, "No, this is what the First Minister wants. It will be done." And I was like, just say to her, like, it can't be done just now. It's not, this is too controversial. We're better waiting for, another country to lead the way and we'll just copy. Because that's a fair policy in government, copy what's working. And I remember she was like, "No, you don't understand. The First Minister is driving this one." And that's not to say Shirley Ann didn't support, because Shirley Ann seems to support I've never known Shirley Ann to not support something Nicola done. She's a strong Nicola fan. But the tone was very much that, no, this will happen. Like, if you are in this inner circle, you will be pushing this agenda. And we've seen that that Shirley Ann wasn't the minister that got over the line. That was Shona Robison. However, we've seen that no minister has deviated from the statements of the First Minister. There's been no evolution. How it was presented initially is how it has ended up. There's no, I think one amendment came through and says, this won't contravene the Equality Act. But I think other than that, all the other amendments were process-led. There's not been any sort of evolution on the thinking. There's not been any evolution in the bill. There's not been any evolution. And for something to last 6 years, multiple rounds of consultation, and still technically have the same gotchas that were in the bill on day one, to still have them when the bill is sent for ascension, is mad. That has never happened in the history of the Scottish Parliament. Yep. There's been no substantive amendment. We could go on about this all night. I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add before we wrap up on this topic, but
I just want to say about the fact you're right. For the 6 years in its true parliamentary terms, it's never actually had a mandate. It's never actually been sent to public or in the member for self-ID. And I think it's back to the kind of disingenuous side. I don't think there would be... I've certainly never met anybody who doesn't think it's the right thing to do to make a process for trans people to get a gender recognition certificate fairer, safer. But what does that mean? And I think that's where the debate comes in. But to then, say, well, we've had a mandate for this. A mandate for what? At what level did you have a mandate? The detail of this that's the most concerning for people, including trans people, is a self-ID. Yeah. It's trans people who are exploiting this will be exploiting. They will be exploiting that categorisation in order to do harm. If you're a predatory male, which, was talked about in the Parliament by the First Minister and others, that, she's admitting people, she said it's not trans people. Nobody I know has actually said it is trans people. They're saying it's people who will adopt that to actually access these spaces. And that, for me, is very disingenuous. And it comes back to the whole way things are done. From my experience, just small story, I won't tell you who it was, but when I was on NEC, this has been playing and repeat on my head. That when we looked at the equality mechanism for the MSPs in 21, which was an unbelievable process. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Conflict of interest, I no longer know what that means. People who were directly benefiting got to vote for it. They were not recused. There was no ask for them to be recused, and they didn't recuse themselves. I think there was one person, I think Greg McCarry, recused himself because he was standing as a candidate, but he didn't, he wasn't going to benefit. I think he was doing it in the counter bit that, I won't benefit, therefore I shouldn't vote. Anyway, somebody who's an elected member said when we were discussing it, and I think the Equality Act was brought up in proportionality, the QC's advice was actually not to do this. But that £6,000 QC's advice was summarily ignored by half of the NEC, and then Kirsten Oswald went against convention to vote it through as chair, which shouldn't have happened because the convention is, as happened in the Parliament, the presiding officer had to cast and vote, and you stay with the status quo. So that was interesting. But this elected member, quite a senior person, said sometimes you have to break the law to change the law, and that shocked me to my core. And I actually did my old, hand up in Zoom, and I said, but we're the party of government. Surely we legislate to change the law? And they just looked at me. You're not a protest group. You are the party of government. Exactly. But it's like rationale has left the building. There's a group think that I saw and others saw in the NEC. In fact, Roger Mullen, who was my co-convener for Mid Scotland and Fife, co-rep, he actually ran a course on decision analysis, which was I kind of run through with him. I'd experience of that myself, and it was very good, and everybody really thought it was great and everything. But that was all about the dangers of groupthink, the dangers of this moral superiority. We used things like the Kennedy presidency and the Bay of Pigs disaster and how he learned from it, and then the Cuban Missile Crisis. Thank God he'd learned from that, and not having the key thing is not having the power in the room, which he realised. Yeah. And I think, back to your story with Shirley Ann, I think Nicola Sturgeon's presence and push on this has meant it's been an impossibility. People have been trying to find reasons for the solution, but the solution was never in doubt. The solution's there. It's like a solution looking for a problem, and that's really dangerous to government. And that really, really worried me. And I think now more people have seen in public what we saw in private at NEC of the way things are approached. I mean, the decision process is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing.
Now, on a nice little pivot we will do, because the mask slipping and the public, the people who lead us. Now, obviously, we've now got King Charles. They're rolling out the first banknotes for King Charles. And the other that was the big news the royals had. But the big news is that Harry and Meghan done their whole mic drop bombshell Netflix series. Which has been met with absolute madness. Now, I'm not a royal fan, but I do enjoy royal drama, because I often get into the feeling that, do you know what, I enjoyed the Netflix series The Crown already, and I enjoy the royal drama. You know, I don't particularly want them as my monarchs, but at the same time, since we've got them, we might as well invest ourselves in the drama that is coming from them. I don't particularly care about new royal babies, I don't care about royal weddings, but I tell you what, family splits and bizarrities there are always fun to see. So, Jeremy Clarkson's got himself a bit of trouble. Although I've not managed to read his article. He apparently wrote the most complained about article that's ever existed in British media, telling Harry and Meghan to basically bugger off. I've not managed to read it because it's been censored. Like, this is such a bad thing. 17,000 complaints. It's been withdrawn from the Sun website, it looks like, so we're not going to read it. Whole freedom of speech issue there. No. However, maybe it's just a case of social policing has, caught up with it. But have you picked up on the negativity towards Harry and Meghan?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because anytime, like yourself, I'm not a monarchist. I've got an interest in anybody who's got any level of power in a society to see what they're actually doing and what's going on there and what the strings that they pull are, etc. But I thought what was very interesting about it was all the focus at this time, as we've mentioned before, with NHS strikes and cost of living crisis, that suddenly this is where everybody's attention was going. So the negativity, it feels like a big squirrel. There's a book coming out as well, so it's a bit like, if you can't have another royal baby to distract, at the moment, let's stick out a book and a documentary. And call me cynical, but the timing of this and the focus of it, I don't think is accidental. They're collateral damage. They're over there. As someone points out to me, there's nothing says I want a privacy than to have a Netflix documentary. So there's a bit of that as well. But I think everybody somehow needs a villain. We need a villain, and we need a hero, and it's pantomime season, and it feels very much like pantomime season. It absolutely felt like pantomime season in Hollywood yesterday, and it feels like that's what we're kind of just living through that just now. And surely to God, we can rise above that as people with some intellectual capacity to see beyond what's actually a distraction into what's. I know you love it.
I personally think if we're going to get stuck with them in an independent Scotland, if we're going to keep the royals, I tell you what, my vote is to have Harry and Meghan as our personal king and queen, because I think that would annoy all the right people. It
would certainly be more interesting.
It would
certainly be more interesting.
It would be fascinating. The odd thing is, I don't know what they've done wrong. Apparently, from their version of events in the documentary, they go on to say that, the paparazzi and everything are, annoying the royals and annoying them, and they don't really want that, and it's an intrusion on their privacy and everything, which is fine. But, they also go on to say, do you know what, being a royal and getting public money, the fact you get public money means that you are therefore game. So they effectively said, can we cut ourselves off from the royal funds? Can we cut ourselves off from royal money? Can we go away and just have nothing to do with this? And do you know what? If that means we lose our title, it means we lose our title. Which, again, I've got to give them credit for that, because I think, do you know what? You know fine well you can't get out the royal family forever. You are, once you're born into that family, it's not like you can ever really leave. But it was nice to see that they at least put that ID up there. I think the royal family pulling their personal protection was quite poor, because, you know, even if Harry does completely remove himself and Meghan removes himself and their kid Archie removes himself from any form of public nonsense and they hide in a little hut in the middle of a field, they are still a political target, that they would be, you know, they would be abducted or something. It's not an unfounded allegation. Whether we like it or not, they are from the royal family, and therefore they could be hostages for any sort of regime that wanted to harm the interests of the UK or the Commonwealth. And I think that the pulling off their security shows how petty actually the UK government and the Parliament can, not the Parliament, sorry, the UK government and the royal family can be. I think it shows how out of touch they are, because I think Meghan Markle, she was a TV star before she was ever a princess, and to be honest, I do think they've fallen in love. I do think it's a bit an odd relationship, but I do think they've fallen in love. And do you know what? They if they want to exit the royal family and they want to just have a family and whatnot, it should have been allowed. I mean, it is a storm in a teacup, but you're right. It has become the story that the UK media and government use to be like, oh my God, can you believe what Harry and Meghan have done? And it's a story that will never end, because effectively they can throw all matter rubbish at it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely on the security side. It's not their fault, you know. Well, it's certainly not Harry's fault or the kid's fault to be born into the royal family. And I think from a practical point of view, from the state, it's a stupid thing to do, to pull their security, because, as you say, you know, what would happen if something did happen and they were used as leverage? You know, what does that make the British state to say, well, it's nothing to do with us? So that's just a bit naive, I think, as well, or certainly short-sighted. But I think the whole thing with the documentary and everything, and the way that it's been portrayed, you know, how do we get to a position that people who have, you know, whether they've fallen in, whether you agree that, you know, she's an actress, so it's all an act, and I know people that do think that, you know, he definitely has had very troubled, you know, upbringing, losing his mum. I think the paparazzi thing is a very real thing for him. And there's been obviously a big concern and paranoia there, and thinking, you know, the protectionist side of, I'm not going to lose my family, to the same way I lost my mum and everything. So that's kind of understandable on a kind of human level. But regardless of whatever they've done, and they've gone abroad, and they've stepped away. They said they didn't want the money and everything, and, you know, people say what they've exploited the name or what have you. Whatever you think about that, what they have not done is they have not had parties during COVID when they told the place to lock down, and you know, when Prince Philip's funeral was going on, they were like, you know, cleaning up the empties at Number 10. They've not done that. They've not had dereliction of duty in public office. They've not done some of the absolutely atrocious things that Boris Johnson has never been held up in the same way that Harry and Meghan have. And I just think it's utterly hypocritical. You know, if you're going to like have, you know, heroes and villains, maybe have a bit more of a nuanced view of what that actually is. What harm have they done to anybody else?
You need a better villain.
A better villain.
You need
I mean,
however,
we've got plenty of choices, to be honest.
It's covered up some things, though. So obviously, this is currently going on, and Harry and Meghan have been big news, and every move being choreographed by the press and the media. But it's covered up some of the bigger stories, and it's helping avoid the fact that, I think, you know, the Royal Mail, through their hopeless negotiation with their employees, you know, half of Britain's Christmas presents are currently in warehouses somewhere. Massive changes for the Royal Mail, massive changes for, you know, organisations trying to succeed just now. There's a recession. We're effectively, I know it's not been declared yet, but it's projected we're in recession. We've got a situation where nurses are striking for the first time since I don't even know when. It's that infrequent. We've got, I mean, people shout about general strike. General strike is not an actual thing. A general strike is just a saying that people come up with. But there's some industries striking, and there's a huge economic catastrophe underway where people are genuinely getting poorer by the minute. The energy companies, not necessarily the energy companies that are suppliers, but the energy companies who are generators, are run away with the greatest profits they've ever seen. And we seem, it's like, oh, there's a problem with Harry and Meghan, let's go and debate their, 20 pence they're getting.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think when you look at Harry and Meghan's situation, you need to look at it in context of, they're doing the same thing to Mick Lynch, they're doing the same things to the RMT staff, they're doing the same things to the paramedics. I mean, some of the stuff from Kelvin Mackenzie is utterly horrific. And it is this, smearing of people in their name. And, when it's somebody not close to you that you don't really know, it's at a bit of a distance, and you think, oh, well, no smoke without fire and everything. And then when it happens to somebody you know well, and you know that it's, you've been there and you know it's a lie, you suddenly start to think, oh my God, what else are you lying to me about? And that is, we're going to kind of keep touching back on this, but I think we really need to be demanding of a better politics, of a better, societal, discourse in the way we treat things. To take things at face value from a media who have no track record in honesty, particularly editorial, press, that, why are we condemning people like, thumbs up, thumbs down in a gladiatorial theatre and dismissing people off the park, despite the evidence in front of your own eyes. And this is where things get really, really dangerous. How people can start becoming, labelled and smeared, and completely oblivious to it a lot of the time. They don't know what's been put out, but it comes back to this lack of debate. It's once you stop debating, you stop debating on the issues, and it starts becoming about attacking the person, and that is a really dangerous direction of travel. And it's something that I hope people start really waking up to, because it's not got a good ending. If you look at history, this has not got a good ending. We need to be very, very careful in what happens. Yeah.
The big problem we've got, though, is it's almost like government, specifically UK government, has forgot that the job of the union is to negotiate on behalf of its members, and it does really. I mean, unions, while they support, they support disciplinary cases and such throughout the year, their main job is usually around working conditions and pay, and that's what they're negotiating on. And I mean, it's not to say the governments do have some good points. Like, we are currently paying much more for agency staff than we're paying for full-time nursing staff, and to their point, they have some serious points that technically we shouldn't have more people that are doing more agency hours than normal working week hours. I totally respect that. If you have a nurse who could be working full time but is working 2 days a week and then picking up 3 shifts a week on agency, we have got the system wrong there. There is a need to fix that. However, the way to fix that is through incentivising them through pay on full-time hours, where the agency isn't paying them. Because the problem you've got just now is the agency is paying 3 times what a nurse earns on a non-agency shift. So we need to invest in the care at the right level. I mean, we're already spending this money. I mean, the odd thing is they're negotiating about a pay rise that, interestingly, we are already paying. Like, the agency doesn't pay the band pay that the NHS pays. The NHS has very little money because of this daft PFI thing that Gordon Brown wrapped us into. We're still trying to get our way out of PFI, which, again, the Scottish Government needs to get a grip on this as well. There's a way. I know you can't unilaterally cancel a contract. However, what you can do is there are unfair terms in there, and you can impose your own recharges to that to try and get some of the money back. Yeah. PFI, and then you get, we get into the rail strikes, and we're busy fighting with Mick Lynch rather than dealing with the fact that Actually, our train service is genuinely dreadful. That's not down to the individual driver or the conductor or anybody's fault. It's down to the fact that the whole thing, you know, I mean, I was flabbergasted the other day that Ukraine was able to, you know, through the cold and through a war, puts on a more on-time train service than we do, with double-decker trains crossing the country. And we're stuck with these old, antiquated carriages, and we have no double-decker. There's not even a plan for double-decker. Nobody's even like, oh, by the way, it works in every other country in Europe. Why don't we have a double-decker train? We've not even, you know, they're busy saying they don't need, what is it, they don't want... Yeah. We don't want a train guard. We don't want a conductor. I don't know what you call them. I'm afraid I'm naive at this, but the person who's not the driver on the train, we don't need them. That's that's to be fought against. Why don't we say, you know, if we've got to get more efficiency out that guy, why don't we just have a bigger bloody train, a nice big double decker thing that we fling along the corridor that takes 700, 800 people on it versus the two carriage 100-person sardine can that we currently call a train. I mean, it's ridiculous. Sorry, I'm on a rant, but it's...
No,
we're busy.
I mean, I lived in Australia years ago. Yeah. Sorry, on you go?
No, it's all right. Crack on.
And I was just saying, you were talking about Europe. I lived in Australia years ago when I was a student, and for a year after I graduated. And the trains out there were double-decker trains, and you know, people commuted from distance. In like Sydney, it was like kind of outside Sydney that we stayed, and you know, they were like air-conditioned trains. They were on time. They were, you know, I mean, it's a massive country, and they had, you know, trains, so people used them. So less people would use their cars than would normally do, which is great. So if the government really is intending to meet climate challenges, transport's one of the biggest ones for emissions and fossil fuels. And it's all very well to say that we're going to ban diesel and petrol cars by 2030. What are you going to do instead? Because the infrastructure for the charging network is nowhere close to even being sufficient for the number of electric cars at the moment. And then the subsidy's been pulled by the UK government on electric cars. I mean, and then what's the disposal of these electric batteries? And if you really want solutions, you actually have to look at the root cause and start fixing them. But even at the union level, and we're talking about nurses, we're talking about RMT workers, postal workers, it's not just about pay, it's about conditions as well. And a lot of the unions are looking at what is the future for their members, what is the future for their industry. The pay thing, you're right, it's like the money going out, these companies are still making profit. You know, these like rail companies, they're still making profits. So even though it's not been invested into the service, so, you know, so the consumer, it's a lose-lose situation. The workers are not, you know, getting enough like paying conditions to, you know, for that to be a good job. I mean, you know, a generation or two ago, you know, people could have you know, two parents and, you know, a family, have one person going out to work, you know, and manage fine. You know, people have got two working parents, sometimes working multiple jobs, and still not making ends meet. So there's something seriously has gone wrong. And if you keep looking at it like, you know, in a sticky plaster way, you will keep getting your sticky plaster coming off and a wider gaping hole materialising that, you know, is pretty septic at the moment. So again, it's a failure of government to do the hard things, and then we've seen our government in Scotland pre-Christmas recess spending 3 long days on a non-emergency bill when we've got the NHS, you know, on strike. It actually blows my mind, to be honest, when you think about it in context.
We do have a final topic on that, because we've obviously, you know, like we've spent some time on non-emergency legislation, the cover-up of things that are actually probably emergency legislation by Harry and Meghan saga. We're not getting adequate coverage, adequate resolution to the strikes or the economy, and people are poorer. And that takes us on to the solution that we all, you know, it came out today that in the G7, the UK is the slowest recovery. out of the entire G7 from the pandemic. And that's down to Brexit, it's down to some of the choices of the UK government, it's down to the basic, 37 billion on a test and trace app that didn't actually work, and some stations that didn't actually make a dent, and all that rubbish. And it comes down to, we had a solution. The independence, the Supreme Court ruled against us. We've had a podcast on that, we've done many blogs on that, but the white flag went up last week because John Swinney reallocated the 20 million that was aside for independence. And he reallocated that to effectively daily spend. And he's using it for the cost of living crisis, which again, I'm not criticising. If you have £20 million in the bank account and you can throw that at the cost of living crisis, great. But the truth is that he's acting as though it's like capital expenditure when it's actually not. It's operational expenditure. The 20 million was a budget line for people who already work for the Scottish Parliament. The cost of living crisis, the people who were writing the white paper are not the same people who are going to deal with the cost of living crisis. It's not a case of, here's Barry and Susie who work in this office. They're immediately going to pivot from the job of writing white papers to going over there to solve the cost of living crisis. That's not how it works. Operational expenditure on a large scale like a government and a corporation, operational expenditure doesn't work like that. It's a line item. So the 20 million was never, there's 20 million in a bank account, and do you know what, we're paying for things. We were paying for progress. And it makes me think that we've found yet another reason. So there's been multiple reasons, like we've paused independence because we just had one. We've paused independence because Brexit's here. We've paused, we've paused independence because once Brexit was done, we needed to see how we were going to transition to Brexit. And then we paused independence because we had coronavirus. And now we've paused independence because we have a cost of living crisis. Now there's a perpetual crisis. This country just lives in crisis. So if the solution is independence, there's never going to be a time. And I think that is a sad thing.
Yep, I completely agree. And nothing else paused during that time. Council elections, holiday elections, nothing electoral for the SNP paused. But you could only conclude they actually don't know how to do this. That's my conclusion. They actually don't know how to do it. So there's a lot of, again, statements made, the sound bites, and we're getting ready. And again, it comes back to this disingenuous politics that just seems to be so prevalent at the moment. You're telling people, as you've just said, 20 million, but it's going to be used for the cost of living crisis. Who would argue with that? Then you look at it and go, hang on, that's not the same. It's not capital expenditure. What on earth are you talking about? And, who is actually going to be working on this? And what do you mean by for the cost of living? In what way? So it all just kind of boils down to, if that's the case, why are you not making a statement? The First Minister after the Supreme Court made a statement on an SNP podium, and we talked about that in one of the podcasts before, that really surprised me. I was really taken aback by that. And then there's been an announcement of an SNP conference, special conference. So that kicked the can a little bit down the road, and it was in the new year. Now, my definition of the new year is not March, never mind like the tail end, the second half of March. In the same way we were waiting for the IndyRef announcement in spring, which turned out spring was in July, like this year. So, so the whole, and then the special conference, people were saying, well, was that not just a spring conference for the SNP? But then I speaking to a friend who's in the SNP, said they don't have a spring conference anymore, which is interesting, for reasons I can't really go into. But I was surprised by that as well, let's just say. So the whole thing is just, where's the honesty of the First Minister coming and saying, I know a lot of people are thinking independence referendum, we've got a secret plan, it's going to be pulled out of the bag, and 7 months exactly to the day from the SNP conference. This is not a conference in Scotland, it's not a constitutional convention. This is a party conference of a subset of a subset of a subset of independent supporters who are in the SNP, who support the SNP, who are members of the SNP, who are delegates at the conference, who can go to a conference on Mother's Day and can travel and have the facilities to go, etc, etc, etc. So this is not Engage in Scotland. This is, again, another closed door, behind the wall discussion of people, and my experience of the conference committee, members won't get close to anything on this. My experience at NEC, you'll be lucky if independence is even discussed, and it's just utterly disingenuous. It really is. It's getting to the stage. Where's honesty in politics and taking responsibility and standing up and saying, do you know what, we got this wrong? And do you know what's even worse? We didn't even know we were going to get it wrong. We had no plan for getting it wrong. If the Scottish Government are genuinely surprised at the Supreme Court, they're in a minority of one, because nobody that I know was surprised at what happened. We had looked and gamed and looked at different options, but it would have been the surprise result. And a lot of that would have been down to, actually, I know it's maybe controversial, but I know you and I both thought the Lord Advocate's submission was actually pretty good, and played in a way that could have resulted in something that a lot of people say, well, it wouldn't be meaningful because it would just be an opinion poll kind of thing, but it would have had validity at a UK level, and it would also have given an international recognition opportunity to actually say the majority of Scotland want this, and we don't have that at the moment. So all the kind of people who want to march to the UN, I'm not sure what they're marching with. They don't actually have anything except a variety of opinion polls that who knows what the next opinion poll will be after the bill. Today, who knows? I mean, you could lose a huge chunk of independent supporters over this just in a protest.
There's a good point. The Scottish Government wrote off the UN as that woman from the UN, and somehow we have to believe the UN are somehow going to immediately, under Scottish independence, be like, oh well, this is an undeniable democratic outrage. Yeah. They were written off in Scotland in the GRR debate, so. Yeah,
I mean, not to be, to start looking forward. We can see what we've got from the politicians just now, but I think I am still 100%, sure that Scotland could be a really successful independent country, and I also think we have got the capability and capacity across Scotland to achieve that. I just think we're being entirely let down by the political class at the moment, and I, again, from my experience, from your experience, internal politics is actually the problem. It's like a barbed wire fence to ideas, to creativity, to new voices, and it's like, people who get power hold on to it. And I genuinely do think the need for control will be what loses them power. And, I think we really need to do... If we want a new politics, we have to be serious about it. And if we don't have a politics that actually engages and represents the public, the amount of people that have said to me, I am absolutely politically homeless. And this is not even members of political parties. This is people who just don't know who they can vote for anymore. I wrote a wee thing today on Twitter, and I was saying, you can't trust the Tories with your human rights. You can't trust the Labour Party with the Equality Act. You can't trust the Lib Dems to run a bath. You can't, trust the Greens on the environment. They've not actually done anything, and you can't trust the SNP, or actually, I'll use the Greens there as well, the Scottish Government, to actually do legislation properly. It's absolutely, what a time to be alive, eh? We've had so much, potential there. We've never been so close as a population to normalised independence. The global position in Scotland is kind of waiting for Scotland, and I just keep coming back to thinking, my initial gut when I heard about 23 was, all right, okay, let's not be negative, hope for 23, but plan for 25, 26, because by that time, nothing to do with Scotland, it's what's happening across the water in Ireland. I mean, the way that they have strategised, normalising, whether it results in a united Ireland or not, the border poll, we've talked about this so many times about the 7 years in the Good Friday Agreement, in the in the Northern Ireland 98 Act as well. Where were Scottish politicians about getting that absolutely nailed down? What have they been doing for the last 8 years? This could have said in 7 years we will have another independence referendum if the people vote us in to have that. I mean, you're then covered, but they have. It's almost like they wait for the elapsed time and then do something. And I think if you really scrutinise, and I know we've not gone into a huge amount of detail, if you really scrutinise, I think we probably need a bit of time to reflect. what happened in the passage of this bill, the GRR bill, that's a really interesting test case to actually see how the SNP operate policy, because they have wasted so much time in that elapsed time, and they have come to this conclusion. And I heard this during the NEC with the equalities mechanism. Well, we have to do it because we've been talking about this for 2 years. And I was like, your bad plan is not my emergency. You're asking me to make a decision that's not decision ready. We need to get, legal advice. We got the legal advice, we ignored it. So if that is the way you run legislation, why is anybody surprised it gets hauled down in the courts? I'm actually genuinely surprised people are surprised.
The one thing that we do have, though, that is a benefit, is even though Scotland is waiting, and even though things seem bleak, and even though our darkest days are possibly here, the good news is that usually when there's darkness emerges light. We've seen that one of your favourite phrases, I think, is that it's the same faces can't make the same old faces can't make a new case. And I think we're starting to see that the old guard are perhaps on their way out. And I think that, it's important, ViveEcosse, we're going to turn, our podcast, not our podcast going to turn a year old, but our blog's going to turn a year old in January. There are some new voices emerging. Shawnee Boy on Twitter and Facebook, these videos are doing fantastically well. There's new talent emerging, there's old talent has come back, Wings and such is back. And do you know what? While it's dark just now, I think that we are about to hit another light, and I think we're suddenly going to get into a world where we don't look to the politicians to lead us, but rather to be demanded from. And it's going to be what we say and the information that we give them is what they should enact. And do you know what? The darkest days have to come, because, if I steal from Batman, the day is always darkest before the dawn. And do you know what? It's pretty dark out there. So the light is on its way. However, we're now at 56 minutes and we've promised to never go over an hour on a podcast. So thank you for listening, everyone.
I'll throw a final cliche back. A final kind of hero thing is, with great power comes great responsibility, and I think people are going to start demanding that. They're going to demand leaders that inspire them rather than try to control them.
Indeed. You've been listening to the ViveEcosse podcast. It is available on basically everything. It is also available on YouTube. It'll be on our blog. We'll chuck it out there because we enjoy talking a lot of nonsense at each other. And hopefully we'll have some guests soon. We had planned to have guests, but as usual, our planning has come up a little bit short. I've been Graham Spence. I've been joined by Alison Graham tonight. Good night.
Good night.